Recording in progress.
Welcome, everyone. It is Wednesday, October 9th, and this is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Safety and Transportation Committee. At the start of the meeting, we have a small but mighty group. We have Vice Chair of the Committee, Councillor Downs from Ward 5. We have Councillor Block from Ward 4 and Councillor Bixby from Ward 6. And we have just been joined by Councillor Lucas from Ward 2. We are also joined by President Laredo. And we are going to get right into our first item here, which is actually, I'm going to start with your item, President Laredo, so that you can go back to public facilities.
Sure.
So this is going to be
Thank you so much.
Sure. 380-24, the Police Chief Selection Committee by President Laredo. And this is his appointment of Councillor Tariq Lucas and Dr. Lauren Solitar to the Police Chief Selection Committee. So President Laredo, why don't I turn it over to you to go over your recommendations here.
I'll be brief. As I think all of you know, there's special legislation which governs how the police chief search process is supposed to take place in the city of Newton. This was done at the time that the chief's position was removed from civil service. And under the statute, the city council president, subject to the approval of the full council, appoints one city councilor to serve and then one resident of the city. Either, I guess, Mr. Yo or Ms. Derek will speak to the mayoral appointments, which are greater in number and also have some prescriptions as to some of the folks who get appointed. But briefly, I think you all know Councilor Lucas, Councilor from Ward 2. He's been a member of this committee since he joined the council, and I thought he would be an excellent choice. There were a whole bunch of folks who were interested in serving. Very grateful for those who stepped up and volunteered. It's always hard to choose among peers and colleagues, but I think Councilor Lucas will do a fine job. Dr. Solitar actually, I think, is going to be a tremendous asset to the search committee. I've known her since our children went to school together many years ago. But most significantly, as I think you all know, she is the president and chief executive officer of the May Institute. It's a national organization that works with people with disabilities and developmental issues. It's based here in Massachusetts. It's an 1,800 employee organization. So she's quite familiar with the hiring process and how you choose senior leaders. In addition, she actually has designed and implemented training programs for police departments about how to work with people with developmental disabilities, mental health, and so forth. And as we collectively work on promoting a modern police force and a modern approach to policing, mental health issues are really, if you talk to any of the officers, will tell you they're critical. And so I think she'll be especially sensitive to those issues and the type of person we want to serve in a chief's role who can help lead in how we deal with that. In addition, she's a clinical psychologist and certainly knows how to work well in a group. So I am quite comfortable with both appointments. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll note that we've been joined by Councilors Wright and Lipoff, who are members of the committee, as well as Councilor Farrell, who is not a member of the committee. Councilors, who has comments or questions for President Laredo, or perhaps Councilor Lucas, since he's here and recommended to serve in this role? Councilor Lucas, do you want to say a word about how you're thinking about this particular committee? No, you don't need to, but just want to give you the opportunity if you want to share any thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just want to say, we saw Chief Carmichael on many occasions in this committee, and I certainly liked Chief Carmichael as the Newton Police Chief, and I am sad to see him take on this next chapter in his life, and I certainly do wish him the best. But when it comes to policing in Newton, policing anywhere is important. And this is something that we need to get right. We need a good and the best police chief that is out there who wants to be the police chief in Newton. So I am eager to serve on this selection committee. Thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Maliki is about to join us as well. I don't see any hands on this item. Do we have a motion?
I'll move both, nominate both candidates.
Okay, motion to approve by Councillor Downs. Any further discussion before we vote? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay, so we have, I think, 6 in favor, none opposed, and 1 abstention. President Laredo, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for
and
putting me
Have
on
a good
first,
meeting at
and
Public Facilities.
I'm going to my next meeting. See y'all later. Thank you so much.
Take care. Our next item is 381-24, the Police Chief Selection Committee by Her Honor the Mayor. And this is the Mayor's recommendations of appointees to the Police Chief Selection Committee. That includes Carl O'Hara, Michelle Lung, Judge Nancy Holtz, Chief Kevin O'Connell, Durej B. Demisi, and Rabbi Keith Stern, and I apologize if I mispronounced any of those names. Mr. Yo and Ms. Kerwin Derrick, can I turn this over to you?
I'll turn this right over to Hattie to manage. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. So as President Laredo mentioned, the mayor does have a few more people who need to fit certain categories. The business executive is Carl O'Hara. I think most people know Patty's and O'Hara's. And there needs to be 2 citizens of the Newton, and that's Derege Demisi. Derege was also on the Newton Police Reform Task Force, and the mayor wanted that continuity. And then Rabbi Keith Stern is a rabbi, lives in Newton, is a rabbi in Newton, was also the chair of our Human Rights Commission. And then Attorney Michelle Leung was on the previous search committee. Again, she wanted some continuity between the previous search and this time. And then Nancy Holtz, there is a requirement of a member of the judiciary. And because of some conflict of interest, we needed to go with a retired judge. So Judge Holtz is a retired judge who currently works in mediation, but has previously been a Superior Court judge, and she is also a resident of Newton. And then she also needs a Police Chief Association representative, and that is Kevin O'Connell. And then 2 that the council doesn't vote on, there are some representatives from the Newton Police Association. So we do have that represented as well. That is in your packet, but that does not need to be voted on this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. And that was a really great overview of what sounds to me like very thoughtful choices. Do we have comments or questions by the council on these recommendations? Seeing none, do we have a motion on this item?
I'll move approval.
Councillor Downs has moved approval. Any further discussion before we vote? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that takes care of the item. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good luck to the task force. Okay, we are going on to item 364-24, discussion and possible ordinance change on the categories and levels of parking fines. Councillor Downs, let me ask you, do you want to put on these 2 items together so that we have one collective discussion?
You know, we can, and I think, you know, the way may I frame it?
Sure. So let me just put them formally both before us. So 364-24 is the discussion and possible ordinance change on the categories and levels of parking fines. 365-24 is a discussion and possible ordinance change on residential parking programs and fee structures. So Councillor Downs, go ahead and frame, introduce, lead the way on how you want this part of the discussion to go.
So as we're looking at parking more generally, I thought it would be good to, look at the motivators for people who want to park in Newton. I mean, are they getting a good deal? Are they getting a nasty surprise? Is what we're doing breaking even? That kind of question. And our good folks over in DPW's parking planning transportation division and the Newton Police traffic division, thank you for coming, Captain Devine, are not quite ready to answer every question we might have, but what I thought we might do is look at, and we might want to put up that chart about the different fines, and think about what data we need to have a fuller discussion. I think one of my questions is, in what circumstances do we charge more or less? Not just how do we compare, but also what's the benefits of having a higher versus a lower fee? How do you think about charging for parking in the village centers, particularly? And I'm trying to also get a better handle on the current parking permit program, what it costs, who benefits, how many spaces, how many permits, and all that kind of thing. And I think for that, we'll need more data than we currently have in hand, although Captain Devine sent some stuff over midweek. I didn't know if I could get that posted to the council website in time, and I sent it to Danielle, and I think she may have forwarded stuff along, but it really ought to be part of a bigger package of stuff that we discussed together. So I wanted to just open this up to my colleagues for us here to chat about what kinds of questions you'd like to get answered. And once you're done, I'll give you a little flavor of what TAG discussed this afternoon when they were thinking about this.
I'm talking muted. Thank you so much. One question that I have as a sort of a table setting thought, when it comes to these fines with respect to parking, can you just confirm your understanding as to whether our fines need to match the cost of administration, essentially? I know you know what I mean, and can probably put it in better words than I can. But
so state
we
law.
We are not constrained by that here. Is that right?
Well, let me give you the background.
Okay.
The fines are not constrained because they're a criminal penalty. We have a ceiling. Captain Devine, you may be able to correct me on this, but I think the ceiling is something like $300 or $350 is the maximum that any municipality can charge without there being some kind of home rule petition, but we're not going to hit that for parking fines. This is what you pay when you get a particular kind of ticket. Parking fees, as long as they're used for parking management, so what you charge at the meter or what your residential permit might cost, are used to be constrained by Prop 2.5 to what it costs to administer the program. But in 2016, that was changed to allow municipalities to use price as a parking management tool, which meant disconnecting it from the cost of administering the program. Is that clear?
Yes, and that is exactly the information I was looking for, stated much more clearly and concisely by you. So thank you.
Sure.
Captain Devine, let me just, first of all, thank you for coming. And just wanted to ask if you wanted to comment at all before I open it up to counselors for any comments or questions.
No, I want to thank everybody for having me tonight. I'm looking over the numbers on, I guess, similar towns around us. We are on the lower end compared to Boston. Waltham, we're a little bit below them, but compared to Newton, Needham, Wellesley, and Brookline, we're kind of right on par with everything. Have we raised our fines in many years? I don't think we raised it in quite a long time. So I think it's up for the council to decide if you want to raise it. But I think we're on, I guess, on the lower end of typical things, I guess.
Okay. Ms. Delaney, do you want to put up on the screen the chart in the packet? I can't see a page number on it right now, but it's obviously the chart right in the beginning of the backup for these two items.
Sure, just a moment.
So there's
Sure,
a
thank
ticket
you.
cost one that's pretty easy to read, and then there's all of the parking permit programs, which is a little bit more than that. And I was trying to print the things that Captain Devine sent along, but I believe he sent to me and to you and not to the committee, so I'll state it here, that so far in this year, there are 185 permit stickers, residential permit parking stickers issued to Newton residents, and roughly 1,200 visitor permits issued, but that we're not tracking how many households get 1, 2, or 3 stickers, how many people get how many permits, how many people get the visitor permits, how many get visitor permits alone, and not the residential permits. So those are some of the other things that you know, to think about on that. And we should, but we have that. We just don't have the per household. And then and I was trying to download and print this, but there's also the tickets that have been issued and the you know, and what they're about. Which
So
we
the chart on
probably want to just summarize what's in those, not what not go over them in detail, because I think everybody needs a little more time to read them and think about them.
Yeah, this chart extends beyond what I think Ms. Delaney is able to put up on the screen. So
Right.
if anybody wants to highlight a particular type of a violation, let us know, and Ms. Delaney can scroll over there. Councillor Bixby, why don't you start off our discussion? Go ahead.
Well, I just had a quick question about this chart, which was very interesting, but are the blanks, do those municipalities not have these fines, or did we just not have the information?
No, I got all of the information from their websites or from calling them. So if there's a blank, they don't have that particular violation.
Okay.
Or they don't ticket for it. And I don't want to get into like super detail on this. I think we should all come back with a couple. I will say though that TAG recommended we have a fee for blocking a bike lane. We don't have that. That's becoming more of an issue, and I would love to hear from Captain Devine on that as well. On that, they feel the parking in a bus stop in particular jumps out as being way too low, particularly as the city is making accessibility upgrades to these bus stops. So not being able to comfortably roll from an accessible bus stop onto the bus is a real issue. But they also framed it as, you know, when we're talking meter violations or even time violations, particularly where we might want to look at meters and where they're located. There is no prohibition by ordinance or by state law to put meters on residential roads, but some residential streets are pretty close into commercial areas. And what happens is they get parked up, and residents don't have much opportunity there. So perhaps that should be considered for at least a app related meter, so you don't have a ton of signage or have to install a ton of hardware. Again, I'm floating this idea and I don't know where we stand on this stuff, and it's something to discuss in the future. But should we do that, then the meter violation in those areas might, just for equity purposes, if someone doesn't have a cell phone or is not comfortable using an app, you might want to make the meter violation there the cost of parking plus a small surcharge, like $1 more, so that they're just paying slightly more for parking. And these are all things that, like I said, I'm throwing out on the table as things for the committee to think about and then come back with opinions on.
Okay, there were a lot of subtopics in there. So if we don't hit on any over the course of the discussion, just remind me and we can come back to them. Like the ones that jumped out at me were talking about whether we should have a particular fine for parking in a bike lane. And then the point you just raised about residential parking limitations and what sort of a system we could put in place to
if we want to
monitor / enforce them.
If we wanted to use a virtual meter rather than actual meter, how do you feel about that, particularly in residential areas? And how do you feel, and this could be in some parking lots as well, and how do you feel about how the fine relates to the meter fee? It's one other way of handling that. Tag also asked why, since the app has a small surcharge on it, and it's cheaper for the city to process that than it is all the coins, do we want to lower the rate if you use the app on a meter? And this is something that will be discussed administratively, but it might be good for this committee to weigh in on that.
Could you
Okay.
Could you email this to us right now so we could open it? Because scrolling
It's
back
in-
and forth.
It's
in the
attached
packet.
to the agenda.
Oh, the agenda. Okay.
It's on the bottom of the agenda.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have Councillor Lucas and Councillor Wright.
Oh,
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, we got a email earlier this day about the number of parking violations, and it looks like it is through all of 2023, which is very good information to have. But for one, I would like to see these parking violation, the quantity of them and the type, broken out, over year, meaning 2023 and then going back to 2022. And I understand 2021, we were still in COVID, so maybe go back to 2019. But just see if there are any trends with these parking violations. Are motorists having fewer parking meter violations, or parking closer to fire hydrants, or whatever it may be? That would be helpful to know if there is a trend. For example, if one trend has the number of parking fines for a particular category going up, then we would know that we probably would need to, in my opinion, increase the fine amount. But that would be good information to have, just so that we can make an informed decision if we're going to change the fine, the value of the fine. Those are my comments for now. Thanks.
Thank you, and I agree. Those were good suggestions. Councillor Block, or I'm sorry, actually, Councillor Wright. I had said I think that you would be next. Did you still have more?
Well,
add?
so I like the idea that it's a discount, or if you pay by the meter quarters, that it would cost more. I think that's a good idea. I do the meters all the time. I have tons of quarters, but if it was cheaper to pay it online, that's what I would do, personally. And then looking at some of these fees and what other communities charge, like just taking a look, like we're out of whack for bus stop, and it says, we do 15 and everybody else is doing $100. And the question is, all these different ticket costs, how often are people giving out tickets? Like, how often are they in Newton Center? Are they there every single day? They once a week? Or are some of these basically complaint driven?
Captain Devine, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Basically, this includes every violation we have that goes into IPS. IPS is the company that we use as a city for tracking all of our parking that the PCOs use on a daily basis. Also, what an officer will use, since we don't have the machines, we use like a handheld, like the orange tickets you see, the old school ones you see on a windshield. So this incorporates both everything we do as a city for ticket wise. But what I tried to do when I gave you guys this report was to include I wanted one full calendar year, which is why we went to 2023, and I could easily get the numbers like the council wanted. We can go back a few years. The only thing I'm not afraid of, is I guess some of the numbers will be skewed since we had COVID. So if you start using 2022 and 21, we'll have drastically lower numbers just due to the pandemic and stuff. But we can happily research and go back on those stuff too.
A follow-up question. So giving out these tickets, are some of them more complaint driven versus, someone going through Newton Center every day or a couple of times a day, or how is that happening?
I would say an overwhelming majority of tickets are issued by the PCOs just going out and doing their job every day. I know someone asked a minute ago whether we just do a Newton Center. Like every day we have anywhere from 4 to 7 PCOs out in various Newton Center, Newton Corner, just ticketing and doing what they've been trained to do. Some of the tickets, like the all-night parking tickets, are done by officers since the PCOs are not work at the late hours, but easily an overwhelming majority of them are done by the PCOs. And I would say, north of 95% are probably just them out there just doing their job. Whenever we get a complaint, we send them down there. If they get the ticket, they certainly notify us and let us know.
So one thing which I don't know if you guys are doing is taking all this data and taking a look at the different villages and things like that, and where there's more areas where people aren't following the rules. If you're, moving people into those areas, the PCOs and stuff, or it's just random.
Yeah, it's hard to track where they go. We have one station in 1306, which is like the Newton Corner area, 1307 Newton Center. We have them all over, and I don't have data on where they're getting them exactly, but
okay. The data is there. It's just that you're not looking at it to make it more efficient to people for the time that they're working or whatever. Because you have all that data of all the different tickets and what was, if that was, put in buckets of different parts of the city, it would make your time more efficient in what you're doing. But just an idea. Okay, that's it.
You can see that they wrote, just say over $900,000 in tickets for the calendar year 2023. Over 500,000 was issued for meter violation. An officer will never write that, so the PCOs are writing that. Overtime parking, another 135,000. Only PCOs will do that. Very rarely does the average officer issue a ticket for parking violations, just because we have the PCOs out there. Whenever there's a complaint, we send them down there. I would say the main thing that we do is the overnight parking.
But for the PCOs, it'd be interesting what parts of the city, are where most people are not following the rules and things like that. But
yeah, I don't know if IPS, the company we use, they're basically out of California, can give us that capability of letting us know each area where they're coming in.
Oh, okay.
I apologize on.
That's okay. Just wondering. Thank you.
I agree, though. It'd be interesting data.
Especially the more serious ones, if, yeah.
Well, we can certainly add that to, our list of things we desire to know, and how much of it is knowable, I'm not sure, or at least easily knowable. But Counselor Downs, I trust you'll kind of keep that on the list of desired points of information. Counselor Block and then Counselor Lucas.
Based on my experience mostly with Riverside, I had developed a very healthy respect for the complexity of parking. And lately, I've been reading more about it, and I think it's even more complex than I thought it was. And I think the more we dive into this, I suspect the more we'll need help to try and sort things out. I'm going to mention two things that I've come across in the literature that may or may not be appealing for people. But one is the principle that free parking is not, generally speaking, a good idea. That parking really isn't free, that it costs something, whether it's in a big parking lot or even on-street parking. And when people get used to free parking, then it gets overused, which is one reason why we have parking meters and charges in parking lots. Whether those charges are at the appropriate level is just one of many questions. And one of the benchmarks that seems to come up a fair amount is that your ideal parking stall vacancy rate is 15%. That if what you have is 85% used, then anybody who really needs a parking space can find one quickly. So they're not circling, they're not adding to congestion, they're not adding to pollution. And so figuring out what price we should set, or any community should set, in order to achieve that is to some extent trial and error, and will vary from place to place. So that in this kind of economic model of parking, you would vary the price of parking depending on supply and demand, so that you achieved this 15% parking vacancy. So that when people really wanted to get to a certain part of town and shop or do something, they wouldn't have to circle, and they would be assured that it would be there, and they would also know what the price was. Varying the parking price sort of leads, which I believe San Francisco is doing as a city, at least in certain sectors, caused me to ask about the technology that may or may not be available to do this. Now, we may not want to do it anyway, even if the technology is available, but it would be nice to know whether it is or isn't, and how hard it would be for us to utilize a technology that would allow us as a city to set fees at the rate that we want to set it at, and perhaps also collect fines, such as many of which are on here. And with the right technology, some of these fines they may be even automatic. If you park in front of a hydrant, for example, it may be that the technology can determine that. Whether that's a legal way to assess a fine is another story, and is all part of the complexity of the parking world that we're involved in. So I just wanted to lay these two concepts in front of everybody so that, I mean, if you all think that this is just too complicated and we should just look at, okay, the bus fee is $15 and everybody else is 100, and we should at least do that. I'm fine with taking that sort of approach. But there's an awful lot out there that one can think about when it comes to parking. So that's it for now.
Thank you. Councillor Lucas and Bixby.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for, is it Captain Divine? Okay, good. I have a question on the backup in our agenda and types of violations. And the two questions I have is there a fine if you are parking and your car is in another parking stall, meaning you're taking up 2 parking stalls? Is there a fine? Assuming, of course, they're not feeding them both meters. And then the other one is I'm thinking about Albemarle Road, where we have the back-in angled parking. If someone chooses to do a 7-point turn and to go in head first, is that finable?
So you're asking if there's a penalty for bad parkers. Is that right, Councillor Lucas?
I think we've all seen that. Hopefully no one on this call has done it. But yeah, I mean, private parking lots, that we're not talking about that, but I've seen it.
I was kidding,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I couldn't help but make the joke. Captain Divine, do you have an answer to either of those two?
Yeah, I mean, there's a wrong direction parking we typically have. I would apply it to that. Angle parking too. If you take 2 spaces up, the PCOs will address that. But yeah, I'm not looking at which exact fine it is. But I know there's a wrong direction one.
Yeah, I see it now. Okay.
And yeah, I think for both you could restrict, not even restricted. Try and look at the.
Yeah, what would the 2 spaces one be? Just looking at the list here.
Would that be a meter?
Yeah, I would say so, because I mean,
Okay.
you want to take up 2 spaces. I mean, if it was me, I would just pay for both meters, right? Because you're not allowing someone else to use it. So,
But with that logic, if I am, not that I ever would, but if I were to park on the street and take up 2 spaces, and I do pay for 2 meters, when clearly I should only be paying for 1, that's 1 less parking stall for someone to use. So perhaps even if you are feeding the meter, it should be more than a meter, a regular meter violation, which I think is $15. So I'm just throwing that out there. If we need to increase for that scenario, taking up 2 meter spots. So
I would just go under the meter violation type of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that was all.
Oh, great question.
And yep. And to all the bad parkers out there, please do better.
May the $15 incentivize you to park correctly the next time. Okay, Councillor Bixby.
Thanks. And in some ways, I think my question builds off of Councillor Lucas's. It seems like there's a bunch of different reasons why these fines are in place. And this is something we don't necessarily have to answer or discuss tonight, but I do think it might be helpful to think about, or perhaps for some of us who might not know, the reasons why do we have no bridge parking, for example, as its own category. Some of these are self-explanatory, like blocking a bus stop or blocking accessible parking spaces or things like that. But some of them might need a little bit more background or history if we were to look at why those are in place, or the appropriate price for them. So again, a longer term question. And while we have you, Captain Divine, I just want to say an extra thank you to you with this group. You've been doing a lot to make sure that kids especially can get to school safely this school year. So thanks for that.
Thank you for the comments.
Thank you. Counselor Farrell.
Thank you, Chair. This may sound a little out of place, but is there a clearly stated goal of what the purpose of fines is? I asked this question because I thought it was really interesting when Councillor Downs stated fines equal criminal penalty. And I actually don't think many people think about that. And so that's one issue. Have we made it clear to people about why we're fining them for offenses? The second part of that is because when I get a ticket, and unfortunately, Councilor Lucas, I get them more frequently than probably maybe any other city councilors, but I always go, damn, I'm only 2 minutes late. What's the city trying to do? Rather than saying to me, hey, I should have known better. I should have managed my time better. I should have gotten back here and done this. And then third, I guess I'd like to know, what is the process to enforce and how successful is it? Are we collecting on most of these fines? And then fourth, and I'll stop after this one, I don't think there is a fine on this list that is appropriately an appropriate amount. I think they should all be more. I think people do not pay attention to fines and the importance of why we're doing it, particularly in business districts where we're saying, glad you can have an opportunity to shop, but we want other people to have opportunity to shop. And you can't park here for 45 minutes if you're only going to be there for an hour. So those four things, I guess I'd like to know, and I think it would be really helpful to explain to people, maybe when they get their licenses renewed or whatever. Here are the reasons, here are the fines we're imposing on you if you do something you shouldn't be doing. And this is why. It's not just a reason, a way for the city to raise more money, but it is a way for us to be better neighbors and to use the resources that we have more appropriately. So thank you for listening. I know they might be a little strange, some of these, but thank you.
So
Captain Devine, do you want to?
Would you
Councilor Downs,
repeat
go
those?
ahead, and then
Could you repeat those four again for me? Because I'm just in bullet form, because you had a couple of things in there. There were one or two I think I could actually, I would actually like to dig into more.
Sure. I mean, if I may speak, Chair.
Sure.
Thank you. I think the first thing I said was, is there a goal for our offenses? Why do we fine people?
Right.
And do we let people know that that's why they're getting tickets?
Right.
And then secondly, that this is, you said fines are criminal behavior, and that's really important. It's not just a slap on the wrist.
It's not criminal, but it's we don't want you doing this, so we're putting a fine on it. Yeah.
Just really saying this is serious business.
Yeah.
And part of that is because while we want people to go to our village centers and shop or enjoy themselves, we also want them to move on when their time is up and be good neighbors about that.
Okay.
I guess I'd like to know about the enforcement process. What is the collection rate on these tickets? And then finally, I frankly think most of these ought to be, the value ought to be increased. Parking in front of a fire hydrant for $25, I can go get 2 beers for $25. $25 is not a big deal these days. And I think if you block a fire hydrant, it ought to be a serious, serious fine. And then ultimately, well, no, that's fine. Those are the four things I said.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. It's there's of course the why are these violations, and then one assumes that I mean, at least I look at them, and most of them outside of the meter fine are not just that you've inconvenienced me or you've taken up a space. It's that you've caused a safety issue. And then the question for finance is how much should that fine be? The question for this committee is how important is that violation to us? And do we think it should be raised? Finance would be doing, if I'm right, Chair, the finance is in charge of deciding how much to raise this by. We're deciding, is this important enough for us to want to suggest to them that this fine is either too high or too low or too high? And I are blocking an accessible spot and blocking a curb cut are much higher than they are in other communities. And that's been flagged by people on the appeals end of things who said, when people make a mistake by blocking a curb cut they couldn't see, do we really want to hit them with a $200 fine? So that's another question for this committee. Thank you. I appreciate that. As far as the enforcement and collection rate, I think we have that and we'll be publishing that shortly.
Can I just comment a minute on the enforcement?
Sure. Yes, please.
Okay. It looks like we're talking calendar year 23, so a whole full year, that we issued, PCOs and police officers included, a little over 56,000 parking in some capacity fines. I gave you all, the council too, earlier in the week, an education disposition report, which included there was roughly about 911 appeals. So, and then of those appealed, 621 were dismissed by the parking clerk, 312 were upheld. So, I mean, everyone who's issued a ticket has the appeal process. Looks like we're getting about 2% appeals. And of the 2% appeals, probably 66% of them are, I guess, given to the benefit of the violating party. So that was also included with the report I gave to you all earlier in the week.
Thank you. On the point of finance versus this committee's role, first, Ms. Delaney, let me ask you, because I just was double checking on our agenda. Were these items jointly referred to us and finance or just to us?
Just us.
Just to us. Okay, that's what I thought. That's interesting. I would have expected that it would have been referred to both of our committees. So that's actually a question for Ms. Moore. I suppose the way that I would like to see this go is that this committee would make recommendations as to what values we would like to see associated with these different types of violations. I suppose technically speaking, finance, decides what the number should be, but not really, because the whole council decides what the number should be. And it's not like there's anything particularly magical about the composition of the finance committee as opposed to this committee to opine on this, particularly where we have a joint goal when it comes to parking and traffic violations with respect to managing behavior. And so I suppose what I would say is I think we could identify which ones are important. I also think it would be appropriate to make suggestions as to what we think those numbers should be. Finance could certainly make its own suggestions as to what the numbers could be. And if there was disagreement, it would be worked out before the full council. I don't know if anybody has further comment on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Councilor Farrell?
Quick question. I don't know whether the captain finds this appropriate or not, but it would be interesting to know whether the police department has a sense of which are the greater priority and which ones we should actually consider looking at increasing to enforce the enforcement. Thank you.
Captain, any thoughts on that?
Sitting at the desk and getting the phone calls in all day, the most of the ones that we receive are for violating like something of a hydrant or an HP spot, that type of stuff. We don't get meter violations. So the ones we get in person are always the more serious ones that people find egregious. We send the PCOs down there directly, but the PCOs, if they come across it, they tag it. But for the most part, they're probably getting the meter violations and all these 2-hour violation type tickets.
Thank you.
Okay, we don't have any hands currently raised. Counselor Downs, let me turn to you. What is the most helpful direction to take now? Do we have more to dig into individually? Do we need to sort of pause, gather more data and come back? What do you think makes the most sense?
My sense is we got a lot of kind of last minute information, not last minute, but just this week information from Captain Devine, all very helpful. And I really appreciate it, Captain. But I need some time to go through that and think about it. And I'm sure my colleagues do too. And then we've raised a couple of questions, one of which is, we're getting appeals of hydrant and curb cut or accessible space tickets, but would be great to get a sense of where those 56,000 tickets all kind of come down on the, how many of each are we handing out? In particular, in looking at the chart, I'm thinking if something on this chart is never or very rarely issued, perhaps that's not something that that the city wants to continue as an entire category, for instance. And in other cases, we might want to look and say, is there something else that needs to be added here? So some of those are in the other violations area. They aren't our violations, but in other cities, they have a fine if you park in an EV space without charging, for instance. And as we add more EV charging spaces into onto our streets and into our public parking lots, we may want to add one of those. Or somebody who parks in a loading zone. Don't think we have that, but when we have loading zones, that might be one that we want to add to it. So I'd ask my colleagues to go back, think about that, think also about, the purpose of the fine that you want to, I'm also kind of appalled that we only charge $15 for blocking a sidewalk when for somebody who can't jump onto the street for whatever reason, then is basically denied the use of the sidewalk, period. Or for a child or a person with a guide dog, they're not supposed to go running into the street. They're basically blocked. So things like that. Think about if we should raise things, think about if we should lower things, and if there's a category missing, and then I want to spend some time. So my suggestion would be that we hold this and we come back in a couple of weeks when we have more data from David Kozis, who has some of this information, and more data from answering some of the questions we've raised, and I'll try to put them into readable format for you after the report comes out, Captain. So we have a little more time to gather data and come back and then maybe we want to break it into separate sections, because one of the other questions is really about our permit parking. If we're going to expand permit parking, perhaps we want to have, and I may have a speaker for us to come in and talk about that. So we might want to wait until after that. But how is it structured the way optimally, or do we want to restructure it? And is the price right? And is the availability of free visitor passes something we want to re-examine? Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, definitely. And I want to thank you and Captain Devine for gathering information so quickly. I know I put this on the agenda really quickly after you formulated the idea and got the docket item going. I thought it made sense to just kick off the conversation and start getting folks thinking and noodling on what we might want to do here. And I think what you laid out as a plan makes a lot of sense. Do we have a motion to hold on these two items?
I'll make that motion if you want.
Okay, motion to hold by Councillor Downs on both of these. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of hold, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I think we have hold 7-0, and that concludes our business for this evening. Thank you all, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you, everyone.